Okay, so today we're going to solve what we call literal equations. Literal equations is when you have more than one letter. So notice that in all of these equations we have multiple variables. So we don't have just an x or just a y. In problems 1, 2, and 3, we're going to solve for y. So that means we want to isolate and get just y equals. So let's start with number 1. So we want to solve for y. So that means we want to get y term by itself. So we need to undo a negative 8x by adding 8x to both sides. Keep in mind, these two terms are not like terms. 10 is a constant term, and 8x, is a variable term. So these are not like terms, so you cannot combine them. So all we can say is that we don't have any more x's on the left-hand side. We just have a 2y, and on the right-hand side, we have an 8x and a 10. If you want to put the 10 first and then the 8x, you can do that. That's the same thing. So if you wanted to do that, that's okay. And then we have to undo multiplying by 2 by dividing by 2. When you multiply or divide, you must do it to every single term. And that leaves you 4x plus 5, because 8x divided by 2 is 4x, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So we have now solved for y because we got y by itself. Okay, so let's look at number 2. In number 2, they want us to also solve for y. So we want to isolate the y and get the y term to be by itself. So we want to undo subtracting 1x by adding 1x. And once again, these two terms are not like terms because they do not both have x's. So we have just a negative 5y on the left-hand side and a 1x plus a 20 on the right-hand side. Then we can undo multiplying by negative 5 by dividing by negative 5. And when you multiply or divide, you must do it to every single term. And that gives us y equals, and then positive 1 divided by negative 5 is just a negative 1/5. And then don't forget those are x's. Notice how I make that x nice and big. And then a positive divided by a negative would be a negative 4. So now we've got y by itself, so we have solved for y. Okay, in problem number 3, they also asked us to solve for y. So we want to isolate the y term. So we want to leave the y term where it's at and undo anybody else who's on the same side as the y term. So we want to undo the 5x, and we also want to undo the positive 4. So we're going to subtract 5x. So we have to subtract 5x to the other side. And let's go ahead and undo adding 4 by subtracting 4. So we must do it to the other side as well. So remember, whatever you do to one side of your equal sign, you must do to the other side of your equal sign. So on the left-hand side, we have no more x's and no more constants, but we still have the negative 1/2 y. And on the right-hand side, you can only combine terms that are like each other. So remember, right now we have all of these terms are on the right-hand side, but we can only combine terms that are like each other. And negative 8 and negative 4 are constants. They don't have any variables, so we can combine those. So that's going to give us on the right-hand side a negative 5x and a negative 12. Do you see where the negative 12 came from? It came from the fact that we combined the negative 8 with the negative 4 gives us that negative 12. Now we can undo multiplying by 1/2, and we can divide by negative 1/2 to every single term, but that seems kind of scary. So remember, when you have a fractional coefficient, it's just nicer, instead of dividing by negative 1/2, isn't it going to be a lot faster just to multiply by the reciprocal? So if we multiply this side by a negative 2, because those are reciprocals, then I have to multiply both of these by a negative 2. And I'm running out of room, so I'm going to squeeze it way back here. So when we do that, what do we have on each side? So remember, when you multiply reciprocals, you get 1, and 1 times y is just y. And then a negative 2 times a negative 5x would be a positive 10x. And a negative 2 times a negative 12 is a positive 24. So don't forget when you're using the distributive property that you watch those signs. And we got y by itself, so we're done. Let's look at the next problem. So in this problem, we are solving for b sub 1. And b sub 1 is that's called subscript. So b sub 1, that is called subscript. And you read that b sub 1 is how you read that. So this is b sub 1 and this is b sub 2. And that's called subscript notation. And I don't know if you really know this, but this is actually the area of a trapezoid. So do you remember what a trapezoid looks like? There's one example of a trapezoid. And then the height of a trapezoid has got to be perpendicular. And so that's where the h comes from in that formula. It's how high is the trapezoid. And then one of these is base 1, so we call this b sub 1. And this is another base, we call this b sub 2. And remember, area is how many squares can you fill up, cover the surface. So we're trying to find how many squares can we cover up the surface with, and that's what area is about. So that's what this area formula is about. So not that you really needed to know that this was an area formula for a trapezoid, but bottom line is we want to solve for b sub 1. So how are we going to do that? Okay, so let's solve for b sub 1. So we have to undo everything that's outside the parentheses. So let's start by undoing multiplying by 1/2. So we can divide by 1/2, right? But as we just showed before, isn't it a lot faster just to multiply by the reciprocal? So we're going to multiply by 2 first. So we're just going to do 2 times a, and then 2 times 1/2 h b sub 1 plus b sub 2. So remember, that's going to give us 2 times capital A, and you should write a capital A because it's a capital A. And then remember, when you multiply reciprocals, you get 1, and 1 times h is just h. And then we have b sub 1 plus b sub 2. So make sure you're writing your subscript kind of low. And then we can undo the h. So since we're multiplying by h, right? So how do you undo multiplication? So we're going to divide by h. We're dividing all of that by h, and we're dividing this by h. So that gives me 2 capital A divided by h equals, and then h divided by h is just 1, right? And 1 times anything is just that thing. So because now I'm really not multiplying anything other than 1, I don't need my parentheses anymore. So remember, I'm trying to solve for b sub 1, right? We're trying to solve for b sub 1. So now I can finally undo adding b sub 2. So I can undo adding b sub 2 by subtracting b sub 2. And what that leaves me with is my answer, and I'm running out of room, so I'll write it up here, 2 capital A divided by h minus b sub 2, and that is all on the left-hand side. And then that cancels out and leave me b sub 1 on the right-hand side. So now I've got b sub 1 by itself. In problem number 5, they want us to solve for w. So to solve for w means we want to isolate the term that has w in it. So we want to undo positive 3l by subtracting 3l. And these two terms are not like terms, so you cannot combine them. So on the left-hand side, we've got a 6p minus a 3l. On the right-hand side, we have just our 3w. So now we can undo multiplying by 3 by dividing by 3. And remember, if you multiply or divide, you must do it to every single term. And then you must simplify if possible. 6 divided by 3 is 2p. 3 divided by 3 is 1, so that leaves you 1l, or just l. And 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 1 times w is just w. So now we've got w by itself. In problem number 6, they want us to solve for h. So we have to get h by itself, but notice in this problem there is no addition or subtraction. It's all multiplication. Remember, in between all that it means multiply and multiply. So we have to undo the multiplication of 1/4, and we have to undo the multiplication of the b. So we don't have any adding or subtracting to undo. So instead of dividing both sides by 1/4, we're just going to multiply both sides by 4, which would be the reciprocal. Because when you multiply by 4, that gives us 4 times capital A. And remember, 4 times 1/4 is just 1, so 1 times BH is just BH. And then we can undo multiplying the B, right? How do you undo multiplication? By dividing. And that leaves us 4 capital A divided by B equals, right? B divided by B is 1, and 1 times H is just H. So see, we've got H by itself. Okay, one more to go. So here we have y equals mx plus b, and they want us to solve for m. So we want to get m by itself. So we have to undo any adding or subtracting first. So we're going to undo adding by subtracting b to both sides. We do not have like terms, so all we have on the left-hand side is y minus b. And then a positive b and a negative b leaves us no b, so we have just an mx on the right-hand side. Remember, they want us to solve for m. So we're trying to get m by itself. So since m and x are being multiplied together, I can undo the multiplication of x by dividing out the x. And that gives me, and I should, that's just the fancy way. So this is going to be x divided by x is 1, and 1 times m is just m. And so you can, sometimes we leave it like that, but that really means that y is being divided by x and b is being divided by x. So both of those are correct. So this is solving literal equations. So here are the 7 problems that we did, solving for each of the variables that they asked us to solve for. Solving literal equations just by undoing one step at a time.